Hello everyone and welcome to Assessment Task 1, first one for the semester. Let's jump into the deep end and start off with what this assessment task is asking you to do. It is a critical leadership essay. So the assessment is your first major works for the semester at 40%. That's a pretty hefty part of your overall grade. So you really need to pay attention to all the details of what the assessment task is really asking of you, and make sure that you cover all of the rubric criterion. We're going to cover a lot of that through today's session, so hang in there, take some notes if you need to, and or note the minute or the timestamp at the bottom at the pieces that you want to come back and revise again later on. Now, because it is 40% of your final grade, as I said, it deserves a lot more planning than a smaller percentaged assessment task. So here you're writing 2,500 word critical essay. It's a formal academic essay. You're not answering separate questions. So what that means is that every section of this essay needs to connect together into one coherent argument. There's a temptation that you go through each section and you write each section as standalone. That's not going to work here. So make sure that each of those sections all connect together and tell a very coherent and logical argument throughout. Now the due date and time, so Sunday 9th of August. Now I've put it on the Sunday at 11:59 PM on purpose, and that is intentional to give you every single minute available within that week to complete your assessment task on time. It gives you that extra 2 days pretty much. Now the risk of that, of course, is if you run into some technical issues on Sunday night, there is no tech support to help you. If you are concerned in any way around the technical ability of submitting your assessment task, do it during a weekday, during work hours. If you miss that window, there of course will be penalties applied, and it's not pleasant, but we have to do that for accountability and fairness of everybody. Now there are 7 assessed sections throughout the whole assessment task, and they're the main components. So each contributes marks toward your final grade. Now these sections, they all build on each other, so decisions that you make early in the essay influences everything else that then follows on behind it. We'll unpack each section throughout this session, so don't worry about that. We'll give you all the resources and information you need. And in terms of focusing on leadership application, the assessment is not about describing leadership. Instead, you're expected to apply leadership concepts to a very real healthcare organization. So throughout your essay, you'll show how leadership supports strategic planning, stakeholder engagement, and of course, organizational success. Now, a quick overview of the assessment task. So you choose a healthcare organization that you know well, or as many of you are potentially not working in a healthcare organization right now, and that's okay. Choose one that you can easily research, where there are a lot of public available information on that particular organization. Now it might be a public holiday, it might be a public hospital, it could be a private hospital, it could be an aged care provider, a community health service, or any other healthcare organization, as long as you can get a lot of information on it. Now the other thing to remember here is about applying one leadership approach. So select one approach that best fits your organization. So examples include transformational leadership or collective leadership, and many, many more. Resist the temptation to talk about multiple leadership theories, because that usually leads to some superficial or only higher level analysis. What you really want to be able to do here is go really deep into one approach, and you'll find that that's much more effective. With the evaluate organizational strategy, you want to examine how leadership supports strategic planning and of course organizational success. So that includes analyzing the organization's visions, its strengths, its weaknesses, its opportunities, and its threats. And you can look at that as being a SWOT analysis if you want to put it in that kind of frame. The focus is on connecting leadership, the decisions that leaders make, with organizational outcomes. Of course, everything that you say needs to be supported with appropriate academic evidence. Now you've probably heard me say once or twice before. If you haven't, you certainly will over time. Is for every statement you make, support it with some scholarly sources, and then give us a so what factor. What's the impact of what you've just said? You've made a statement, you've supported it with evidence. Now, what's the impact? I want you to remember that, the 3 S's. It will help you throughout all of your academic journey. Then you want to develop a critical analysis. So throughout the essay, move beyond describing. You don't want to describe information. What you really want to do is explain. The word explain here is important. So explain why leadership matters. Explain how it influences organizational performance and whether alternative approaches might be more or even less effective, depending on what the argument is. Critical analysis is what differentiates higher grades from the not so higher grades. All right, so what is this assessment task really asking you to do? Start by understanding your organization. Explain its ownership structure, its vision, its leadership roles, and its stakeholders. This creates the foundation for the rest of your essay, so you need to get this right first. Everything that follows should be connected back to the organizational context. Can't say that strongly enough. It all needs to come back to that, and throughout your essay, you need to keep anchoring it back and coming back to reinforce that connection. So instead of simply explaining a theory, demonstrate how it works in practice. So show how your chosen leadership approach addresses some real organizational challenges. Now, this approach addresses real organizational challenges. Okay, you're not making things up here. This is genuinely real. This application is much more valuable than providing some generic textbook definitions on their own. Make it relevant to the context. Then you want to evaluate strategic decisions. So strategic planning involves making choices that influence long-term organizational success. Consider how leadership supports these decisions and responds to the challenges identified in that SWOT analysis that we spoke about a little bit earlier. Explain the reasoning behind the leadership actions. And toward the end, you really want to recommend some very practical interventions. So you want them to be reasonable, you want them to be practicable, so that they can be implemented. They're not impossible. So that happens a bit later in the essay. That's when you should be recommending some management interventions that demonstrate your chosen leadership approach. So these interventions should be, as I said, realistic, and they should be, again, directly related back to improving organizational performance. Practical recommendations will strengthen your argument. Pipe dream or unrealistic recommendations will weaken your argument. Now look at critically compare context. So you'll examine here whether your leadership approach will still work in different healthcare contexts. So you want to show a contrast. That requires some very thoughtful comparison, more so than simply saying yes, it would be relevant, or no. You really want to unpack where it would be and why. What's the difference? So consider differences like ownership, geography, or sometimes healthcare systems. Understanding the essay structure itself. So introduce your organization and explain the purpose of your essay. So briefly outline your argument, indicate how the essay will be structured, and a good introduction prepares the reader for what follows without providing too much detail. Remember, the word count is important. This sets the scene. It doesn't tell the whole story. Now, with the SWOT analysis I mentioned a little bit earlier, analyze the organization's strengths, analyze its weaknesses, analyze its opportunities, and of course, analyze its threats. Remember that the assessment specifically limits you to no more than 3 points for each SWOT component. So don't go overboard. You need to be concise and pick the top 3. Don't go into the shotgun effect and hoping you hit gold. It won't happen that way. Be very deliberate about what you choose. Focus on quality more so than quantity. Look at the leadership approach. Explain the one leadership approach that helps the organization respond to its SWOT analysis and strategic goals to demonstrate why this particular leadership style is appropriate or the most appropriate for your chosen organization. Keep linking back to the organizational needs. I think that's one hint I can give you that will help you anchor it back to be relevant throughout. Stakeholder engagement. So discuss how leadership engages staff and engages all its stakeholders. So that would include consumers, partners, investors, all these sorts of things. Consider communication, collaboration, and shared decision making. So show how engagement contributes to the organizational success. Management interventions. Recommend 2 practical, I stress the word practical, interventions that demonstrate your chosen leadership approach. Now explain how these interventions would operate within your organization. And remember how we're coming back always back to your chosen organization. Keep anchoring back to that. Focus on practical implementation, so things that can be done, not things that are pipe dreams or impossible or unlikely to be done. You want to focus on that more so than any abstract and or generic ideas. So compare your leadership approach in another healthcare setting. This may involve another country. It may also involve another state or another ownership structure. It could be many different variations, but evaluate whether your approach would still be effective. And with that, you need to also justify your reasoning behind that. With the conclusion, you want to summarize your key points or key argument and draw together the major findings from your essay. And within that, you want to highlight the most important lessons for your organization. And remember, with the conclusion, it's true for almost every conclusion you'll draft in academia land, and that is, don't introduce any new ideas or any new content. You are bringing together the journey you've had so far. Nothing new gets entered into it. All right, section 1, the introduction. So here, briefly explain the organization's ownership structure, the overall purpose, introduce its vision, its identity, identify the healthcare context in which it operates. So what services does it provide? What do their consumers look like? What cohort are they serving? That kind of thing. Keep the information concise, but keep it informative. Then you want to tell the reader exactly what your essay will examine. State that you will analyze leadership and within the organization and explain how it supports strategic planning. A clear purpose statement in that space, nice and early, it will improve the overall flow of your essay. And it's great at flagging the direction you're taking. And you can keep coming back to that as you're drafting the rest of the document so that you remain in that lane. You don't veer off and talk about other things. Describe leadership context. So here, identify key leadership and management roles together with some of the important stakeholders. Now, an important stakeholder would be the consumer of whatever that service is. So the patient or the client, whatever the terminology is in that particular setting. That will help establish the organization's environment that you're going to end up talking about a little bit later on. Keep your descriptions relevant to the assessment. And you want to talk about your key argument. So state the position your essay will defend. So people know up front, this is what they're going to talk about. So this is what they're going to defend. The argument should remain consistent throughout every single section. Now, a strong argument gives the essay direction and coherence. Also, briefly explain how the essay is going to be structured. How is it organized? This will help the reader to understand the logical progression of your discussion. Just 1 or 2 sentences is usually enough to do that. You don't have to write a whole paragraph on that. Section 2, strategic planning. So develop the SWOT analysis. So carefully identify the organization's internal strengths. You want to look at their weaknesses together with the external opportunities and threats. So we're doing the SWOT, right? That's what SWOT is. Together, you want to do that with all of the internal and the external influences. So each point should be relevant to the organization's strategic planning. You want to focus on significant issues, not so much about creating really long lists. Just pick the top 2 or 3. And you look at the rubric, I'm pretty sure it says 3, no more than 3. So you don't want to be picking 10. You might do that in part of your brainstorming component as you're preparing, but whittle it down to the things that are significant. Here we go. Yes, maximum 3 SWOT points. So yeah, keep it to the no more than 3. The assessment is very clear about this. Choose the strongest examples, more so than, as I said earlier, the shotgun effect or just going for more. Quantity is not quality in this space. Also explain how your SWOT analysis relates to the organization's strategic vision. So when this takes you back to the very beginning, when you're looking at an organization to choose, make sure you can find one where you're able to locate its actual strategic vision. Now, a lot of organizations do promote this. They do publish this in different ways. So find one that works. With this strong alignment, strong alignment is when you're able to continually link back to what the organizational goals are, what their vision is. That helps you to stay aligned and stay on track with the rest of the document that you're working on. Now, with the explain leadership approach, this is important. Introduce your chosen leadership approach for completing the SWOT, after completing the SWOT. But the SWOT and the leadership approach, one informs the other. So the SWOT will tell you where the opportunities are for you to choose the most appropriate leadership style. So under weaknesses, that might talk about certain things that rule out transactional leadership. Or under strengths, that might be something that promotes more transformative leadership. You've got to work that out so it comes after the SWOT. Show how the leadership style addresses the organizational challenges, its opportunities, threats, weaknesses, all those sorts of things. Avoid describing leadership without linking it back to the SWOT. SWOT, then leadership style. With the connection of the two, you're providing a rationale why the SWOT has informed the leadership style that you've chosen. So yes, justify the leadership choice. That's what I was just saying then. You really do want to unpack why you chose it, and the best way to do that is use the SWOT as your evidence for the choice. Section 3, stakeholder engagement. So before you can discuss stakeholder engagement, you really do need to identify who the important stakeholders are within your organization. They may be, or they may include, because it'd be several, could be including the staff themselves, could be including the patients or the consumers, depending on your language. You want to look at executive leaders, governing boards, government agencies in many cases, partner organizations where they exist, and of course the local community. Not every stakeholder has the same influence. So think very carefully about who is the most important for your chosen organization. The marketing team, they really want to see that you understand the people who influence or are influenced by organizational decisions. So explain engagement strategies. In this space, that links back to stakeholders, right? Because you have identified who they are. Now you want to look at the engagement strategies and be able to explain why they match the stakeholders that you've identified. And of course, we want to link back to the organizational vision. So keep returning to the organization's vision throughout the whole section. And it doesn't need to be 5 paragraphs or even 5 sentences. It could be 5 words. Do it carefully, but do it consistently. Stakeholder engagement should always support the achievement of the vision more so than being just a discussion about communication in general. So ask yourself this question, that is, how does engaging these stakeholders help the organization achieve its strategic goal or its vision? So if you continually can answer that question as you're drafting this section, then you know your discussion will stay focused. Now here, next one is apply leadership approach. So your chosen leadership approach should drive the way forward for the engagement to actually be effective. So don't suddenly introduce another leadership theory here. You have to have chosen the most suited leadership theory earlier on and make sure it's aligned all the way through. So here you want to explain how your leadership style, it encourages communication, collaboration, or shared ownership within your organization, within the context of the key stakeholders that you've identified. Now, consistency throughout the whole essay is a really important characteristic of a strong submission. So don't change your mind throughout. Just choose carefully at the beginning. That's why planning this out before you start writing is really clever. And of course, support with evidence. As I said to you before, make a statement, support it with evidence, and then give us what's the impact or the consequence of that, the so what factor. Section 4, manage interventions. This section helps you to recommend 2 practical management interventions. Think about about actions that leaders could realistically implement within your organization rather than some very broad theoretical ideas or recommendations that are nowhere near possible to be done. They need to be realistic and reasonable. So examples might include leadership development, team training, quality improvement initiatives, or sometimes even structured communication processes and so on. Choose interventions that naturally and authentically align to your chosen leadership approach. Now, you want to be able to explain what does that implementation look like. So in terms of, you don't want to describe the intervention only. You want to go beyond that. You want to explain how it would actually be introduced into the organization. So some examples that you'd want to consider here is who would lead that? Who would participate in that? What resources might you need to make it work? Thinking through all of these implementation concepts and ideas, it will demonstrate a much deeper understanding of management practice and bode well for your overall grade achievement on this assessment, or at least on that criteria. Then demonstrate leadership practice. So this is where you show your leadership theory operating in practice. So explain how your chosen leadership approach shapes the way these interventions are implemented, and of course, how they are supported. Supported not only in implementation, also consider about sustainability of that implementation. Now, the intervention itself on its own isn't enough. The leadership approach should influence every stage of implementation. So, with the improved organization outcomes, explain what improvements you would expect for each intervention. Now, these might be better staff engagement, improved patient outcomes, stronger teamwork, or progress towards a particular goal within the organization's vision. So you want to put it into context. Always link expected outcomes back to the organization's objectives, more so than just discussing some benefits in long terms or in general terms. And of course, justify your recommendations. Make them defensible. So justify why you selected these 2 interventions. There could have been 10 to choose from. Why did you pick the 2? Support your recommendations with evidence from the academic literature, and or you might see some very solid evidence from industry papers, etc. You can also look at that as well, as long as they're relevant and they're credible. Section 5, leadership in a different health context. So this section asks you to move beyond your original organization and consider whether your leadership approach would still work somewhere else. Now, it doesn't have to, but it might. So this is what you want to be able to start to unpack. This could involve, so the differences could be in terms of geography, so another Australian state, another country, or it might be something else a little bit more local, like the ownership structure, or it might be looking at public versus private, and so on. So the comparison, you would benefit from having the comparison be thoughtful and deeper, more so than very high level and superficial. So you want to analyze the leadership effectiveness. So here, you don't want to just say something simple like the leadership approach would or would not work in that different context. You want to analyze why it might be more effective or maybe less effective
or maybe it needs some modification in the new setting. These are the considerations you want to start to unpack. With this, think about the organizational culture. Think about what resources do they have available. Look at their funding arrangements, their workforce differences, and so on. This is where really critical thinking becomes particularly important in discussing and articulating this in a smart way within the paper. Now, consider the ownership differences. I sort of touched on it a couple of times. Public, private, not-for-profit, they all have very different priorities. So understanding that context is straight away very important. Explain how the differences may influence leadership practice and strategic decision making. So demonstrating that understanding of organizational context is a big move towards showing some strategic strengths and analysis, academically speaking, for your particular submission. And consider system differences. So healthcare systems, they do differ. They're different, of course, between different states and, of course, through different countries. And some of those differences might be in terms of legislation, certainly around funding, workforce availability, patient experiences, patient expectations, and they may all therefore influence leadership effectiveness. That's why it's so important to go a little bit deeper than just top service level. Consider how these environmental factors might support, or they also might limit, your chosen leadership approach. And critically evaluate the outcomes. So finish by evaluating whether the same organization could, or the same organizational vision could realistically be achieved in this different setting. So here, what you'll find works well is having a very balanced approach or balanced discussion that acknowledges both strengths and weaknesses. Try to avoid the single, there's only benefits and there's no limitations. Try to avoid that because that doesn't demonstrate robust critical thinking. All right, understanding the rubric. The rubric rewards submissions that are easy to follow. And part of that easy to follow is flagging it quite early in the introduction, but it's also about maintaining that throughout. Each section should flow really logically into the next. They're not separate. You want to be able to demonstrate and have very clear links back to your organization and the overall argument that you're positioning with. If your essay reads like several disconnected pieces of writing, like the sections, then that's going to be really difficult for the marker to follow your reasoning. So keep that in mind. You want to make it easy for the marking team and the reader to understand the journey and to see how it all links together. In terms of the critical analysis, one of the biggest differences between average and what we see as high-performing submissions is the level of analysis, more so than just describing, and that describing might be around the context, it might be around the leadership concepts, etc. You really want to explain why they matter. You want to evaluate their effectiveness. You want to discuss the limitations where appropriate, and always move beyond just the describing component. Now, with the strong evidence, high quality evidence strengthens every major argument. The way that the evidence is integrated into your writing is quite powerful and can be influential, as well as the evidence itself being credible and, wherever possible, contemporary as well. Now, I mentioned the word integrated. I want to unpack that a little bit more for you. So you don't want to have a statement, and then at the end of it, you throw in 5 references, or 3, or even 2. That shotgun effect at the end, or they call it reference or citation stacking, that actually works against you, because the reader and therefore the marker is unable to determine which one of those references is supporting what component of that statement you've just made. So it makes it really difficult. And in many cases, we basically write back in the feedback, we don't know which one supported it. We can't count that sentence. So it's better that you integrate it quite well within the structuring of each sentence and each statement. Now, the logical argument. Think of your essay as telling one continuous story. Every section needs to contribute to the same overall argument about leadership, within your chosen organization. Keep referring back to the organization's vision, its strategic goals, and that will help you to maintain that coherence throughout. Accurate academic writing. So good academic writing, it is clear, it is concise, it's very well structured, and we're helping you here. We've given you some structure already. So follow what we're advising you to do. And of course, the referencing style. We're going with APA 7th edition referencing. Within that, as I mentioned to you before, integrate the citations really well. Make sure that they are credible references. Make sure that your reference list and all that is formatted appropriately. There's a lot to consider within that. You also want to look at your word count. So once you exceed the allowed word count by 10%, we will stop reading where we are. And if your best work is at the end, the marking team will not see it. And of course, therefore, your marking, the criterion, you won't be able to achieve the marks you otherwise might have. So just be aware of your word count as well. Let's unpack the rubric even deeper and have a look at what some of the different factors or the grade systems here look like. So at a pass level, students generally answer each question, but they rely more so on description only. So they explain concepts, but they provide very limited analysis and even more so limited application. So the discussion often stays really general, and it doesn't really connect the ideas back to the organization. But as we move up to credit, you can see a little difference here. So credit level submissions provide clearer explanations and they apply theory to the organization. So there's context and connection here. The discussion is more focused. It's supported by evidence, although there might still be some opportunities to deepen that analysis, but it is still there. These submissions show a better understanding, but they don't always demonstrate certain depth in critical evaluation. But as we move up to that distinction level, here what we see, the submissions consistently apply leadership theory to organizational practice. So they explain how concepts influence strategic planning, stakeholder engagement, and management decisions. So there's that connection to all of that. The discussion remains focused on the organization throughout the whole essay, and it demonstrates some really strong integration of their evidence, so their citations and their support. Moving up to the high distinction. These submissions go beyond application. They go towards something called critically evaluating ideas. So they acknowledge complexity, they consider alternative perspectives, and they justify conclusions using really strong contemporary evidence. The writing as well is coherent, it's persuasive, and it's consistently analytical, more so than what we talked about earlier in being descriptive. Across all the grades, the quality of evidence really does matter. Contemporary peer-reviewed research, government reports, industry literature, they should all be there to support your arguments throughout the whole essay. Strong evidence helps convince the reader that your conclusions are well-founded. Some common mistakes and how to avoid them. Now, one of the most common mistakes is spending too much time explaining theories instead of analyzing the theories. And I hope you can see the difference between the two. After you've explained an idea, always ask yourself, so what? What does it mean? Why does that matter, particularly for the organization in this assessment task? Those questions naturally lead you into much more of a critical thinking or critical analysis kind of lens. Then you want to look at the multiple leadership theories. So students sometimes introduce several leadership theories, and I'm not sure why they do that. Maybe they believe that more theory will earn more marks, but in reality, that doesn't happen that way. What happens then is you start to dilute your word count and the message. So choose one leadership approach and apply it consistently throughout the whole essay. Now, if we're looking at weak evidence, so avoid relying on outdated or very limited evidence. Use contemporary peer-reviewed journal articles supported by relevant industry and government publications wherever possible. Poor organization links. This is, very common. What we see here, and it happens too often, is people forgetting that the organization, or to talk about and anchor back to the organization after they've done their introduction. Like they unpack it really well in the introduction, and they don't come back to it throughout the paper. This is an error. You need to avoid doing that. Every section should continue to refer back to the organization's vision, strategic priority, and context. So if your discussion could apply to any organization, then it's probably too generic. And another thing that I've mentioned a little bit earlier on is about exceeding the word limit. So manage your word count carefully. Spending too many words on some of the earlier sections means that you run out by the end. And or if you exceed your overall word count, you know already that we can't mark anything that you've gone beyond the 10%. Some frequently asked questions. So which organization do you choose? So with that, I did touch it on in the beginning. Let's unpack it a bit more. Choose an organization that you know well. And if you don't know any organization well, choose one that you can research and find publicly available really thoroughly. So this might take you a while, so start early. The best choice is usually the one with a very clear vision, with publicly available strategic information. So they have a strategic plan or a master plan, or whatever they want to call it, and that you can access it, and that they have enough detail in what they've publicly released and published to support all of your analysis. A well understood organization, I hope you can see now how it's all connected, it will help every other section, and it'll make it easier to write every other section afterward. Now, which leadership approach should you choose? I did mention it earlier, but it remains to be a very frequently asked question. That is, select a leadership approach that best fits your organization. So the goal here is not so much about breadth. You're really looking at applying one approach that works very consistently with your particular organization. And we mentioned it a little bit earlier. Do the SWOT analysis. That will give you some ideas. It might rule out a few options, so you've got less to choose from. It also might point quite directly to what is the best matched leadership style. Now, how many references comes up all the time? Now, there is no specific required amount, but what I said to you earlier and we've said throughout is make a statement, support it with evidence, and then give us the so what factor or the impact, the consequence. So the more statements you have, the more references you'll need. Think about that for a moment. So can I use workplace? Yes, provided that you can describe the organization accurately. This is your workplace. If you have one, by all means do that. But remember that it's still an academic assignment. It's not a personal reflection, and you do need to support your observations with some published literature wherever possible. Now, how critical should you be or can you be? At postgraduate level, the marking team really are expecting some very critical analysis throughout your whole essay. That doesn't mean saying negative things. What it means is evaluating ideas, explaining why those matter, and considering alternative perspectives, and justifying then your conclusions with the evidence supporting your justification. Here again, description alone is unlikely to achieve a very good mark for you. Some final tips for success. Plan early. So strong alignment or strong alignment to the organization. Choosing the organization to begin with takes time, and that alignment between the organization and every other component also takes time for you to map it out and make sure that it all will tell that coherent story throughout. So spend time, and it takes time to choose that organization. Locating quality literature also takes time. Planning your essay is the most important part, particularly as this essay is so interconnected throughout. Start early. Stay focused as well. So keep reminding yourself that the assignment is actually asking of you to do what we've just covered. Don't be distracted or derailed by getting other ideas. Go back to the beginning. Look at what we're actually asking you to do in this assessment task. And a really good practice is to write your introduction and use that as your guiding light throughout, because that's the promise that you're telling the reader and the marking team that you're going to deliver on. So once you are really strategic and structure that well, that should give you the rest of the direction. Linking the sections together. We've mentioned this a few times, and this is key. Remember that this is one essay. It's not 6 separate assignments based on the different sections. Each section has to naturally build on the previous one, and it also needs to prime you for the next one. We've mentioned support every argument 100 times. Oh, that's an exaggeration. A lot of times. So keep coming back to that. Statement, support, so what? Say it with me. Statement, support, so what? And of course, proofread really carefully. Good academic writing is without errors. So that some of the errors that we constantly see are a change between academic Australian spelling to Americanized spelling. That will cost you marks. Also, we see punctuation needs addressing, full stops, commas, those sorts of things. The way that you structure your citations, also important. So proofread it all, make sure it's all the best that it can be. That takes us to the end of the assessment task webinar. Good luck, and I'll see you in the discussion boards and or through the next webinar.